I don't really like the term Uber geeks, right? But like, what do you call the people left at the very end of the DevOps day with a massive storm outside? Let's wear it with some pride of all the Uber geeks here in the room. I welcome you to my lovely talk on the anatomy of a patch, where we're going to be talking about backporting. And a big round of applause to you all. So hello, I am Benji, and I am the VP of Engineering and co-founder at a company called Root. And what we do is we try and provide secure versions of all of open source to the world at large. And the way that we do that is through backporting. So what I'm going to talk about is backporting. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to say why backporting is hard. We're going to talk about some do's. We're going to be talking about some don'ts. We're going to use some real-life examples. And we're going to leave you all with some sweet principles to follow. But first of all, as all of you might be asking, what is a backport? And here we have something pretty simple to explain. So let's start. There is a concept called evergreen, which means let's always move to latest. So if there's any vulnerability or any bug that we have, we can just move out there and upgrade our code. But upgrading to latest all the time makes my code break. This is a problem. And again, we saw this just the other week, just this last week with React full shell, massive vulnerability, 10.0, affecting huge parts of the world. But all the people who weren't quite lucky enough to be able to upgrade to a fixable version were left with their still broken and vulnerable version of React. And it got even worse because then Cloudflare came along and said, oh, we'll create a mitigation to help all those people who can't upgrade, and then they broke the internet again. So all of this basically means sometimes we need a minimal fix for a dedicated bug or CVE in order to get where we need to go. So why is backporting hard? So code changes, friends. And the reason that code changes is because we, as human beings, change. Isn't that poetic? And the code that we wrote 4 years ago, I really don't want to look at it so much anymore because I wrote very, very bad code. And the same is true organizationally and of frameworks, and stuff changes as we sort of move about. And as code and structure and APIs change, we also accumulate security debt, which is another word also for technical debt, just of the security kind. So we do all kinds of things that we leave behind the couch because we hope no one will ever notice, and one day it might blow up in our face. And finally, context and dependency differences. We add new dependencies and different types of context of things that we're trying to achieve with our code. All of this means that a fix that might be relevant for our latest isn't necessarily relevant, immediately applicable for our current version. So let's move into some do's and don'ts. So I'm going to start very, very simple here. The first is do, targeted changes. So here is a very simple vulnerability in command injection in git config. And as we can see here, we have a single carriage responder /r, which enables people to inject code into a git config file. And the solution for this here is pretty simple when we come and backport it. It's dedicated into a single place, into a single line. It has minimal surface area that we need to change. It's reusing existing code, and it's very easy to review and fix. So that was simple. Let's look at some don'ts here. So suddenly, just note, the last one was 37 lines. Now we're getting into thousands of lines of changes here. And the vulnerability here is pretty simple. It's again a command injection in git config. This time, instead of a carriage responder, it's a pipe that could also allow us to inject malicious code. And the way that this has been responded to here is slightly different. So there's two things that we kind of see here. The first is that all of the changes that we have here weren't dedicated to a single CVE. However, we went about, and so the developer who tried to fix this tried to do general hardening as well. And in addition, the fix that they tried to apply had platform-specific code. So if it's for Mac, one solution, if it's a PC, another, Linux, another type of solution, all of which is very, very bad if you have downstream users using this who might end up using a system which you haven't relied on. So don't mix your security fixes with general hardening. Second thing that we shouldn't do, don't assume specific API contracts. Guys, it's very, very late in the day, so I'm not going to explain to you what PSVI is at this specific moment in time. But the vulnerability that we have here is a use after free. Because what happened was people were using a cursor in order to use the document's name to define the specific ID of that document. However, if someone malformed or reused that document name, you could end up in a use after free. So the solution that they applied here in Trixie, and this was almost 1,000 lines long, used PSVI in order to change what was going about. It deprecated the older function, introduced a brand new function in order to create this ID. And there are multiple problems with this. Obviously, the size of this is quite frankly ridiculous. But more than that, we've broken the contracts of the API. So the API, anything downstream of that, no longer knows exactly what it should or shouldn't be using. And we deprecated an API which might have been vulnerable, but which a lot of people could have been dependent on. So how could we do this better? And note that this change was made in Bookworm, which is actually an older version of Trixie, but the developer who made this change was potentially just a little bit smarter. And he came up with a 318-line change that didn't break the API contract, and that instead introduced a new helper function, called by that function, that did all of the PSVI magic, but then returned to that original function the exact same ID that it expected, and allowed that function to continue passing back and forth the information that was going through it. So this keeps everything in place and allows us to have a decent backport. So getting to the end here of what's been a very long day and a long talk, and I thank you all for your patience, let's talk through some golden principles. First of all, minimal surface area. Try and make your change as small as possible and as targeted as possible. It's a backport, you're trying to go for a single type of change. The second is API independence. Rely on the fact that you have set contracts between your APIs. Never ever break the type of input or output that you're expecting to see there. Comprehensive testing and defensive coding go together. Test everything as much as possible. Look for edge cases. Assume, especially if you're doing this in a package which is part of an overall dependency, that people are going to use the code in weird and wonderful ways that you didn't necessarily expect. So try and make sure that it behaves exactly as is expected and is known to be done. And obviously, self-contained changes without going to any type of crazy general hardening. So how can we then know whether or not there is a good or bad backport when you come to review it or write it? So we basically have a few things. Size, it should be minimal lines, and it should be minimal amount of files changed. Dependencies, we shouldn't try and introduce new dependencies into this, because that could again introduce new breaking changes. API changes and platform code, none. Just none. Make sure that you aren't ever breaking that type of the contract inside the API, and make sure you're not introducing platform code. And focus on a single CVE. Thank you very much, guys. It's been really lovely to have this talk with you. And if you want to hear more, talk to me.